There we go.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
All right. First glitch of the day. I'm Peter Sandborn. I'm a professor in mechanical engineering at the University of Maryland. Actually, by education, I'm an electrical engineer. I have been active in the system sustainment space for about 20 years, over 20 years. My group has done lots of work in the obsolescence, DMSMS space, in forecasting and management, design, refresh, planning for lots of years, and we continue to do that today. My group is really a set of life cycle cost modelers. That would be the thing that would be how we would characterize ourselves. So we get involved in a lot of maintenance planning and optimization, reliability, availability, outcome-based contracts, and aging supply chain problems, both obsolescence and counterfeit part management. People basically come to us because they want to make a business case to strategically manage the sustainment of a system. And business cases are not easy to make. It's easy to say the sky's falling. It's harder to quantify that for the customer or for management. So that's where we get involved often. We have very close ties now with the public policy organization at the University of Maryland as well, because we've been around long enough to realize that you can do wonderful and very cool optimization at the academic level, but if the policy doesn't keep up, that was a nice academic study, and that was about it. Okay. So for me, sustainment is lots of things, of course, but I've chosen to focus on a particular aspect of sustainment, which is sustainment is, or well, should be, a science and a culture. All right. So today, sustainment is not recognized by academia as science, i.e. it's not an acceptable academic pursuit like fluid mechanics or control systems or operations research, and it really should be. And furthermore, the non-sustainment community, the public, also does not recognize sustainment necessarily as a thing. Okay, so how do we go about changing that so that the bigger community, which are the customers ultimately, the taxpayers potentially, actually recognize what sustainment is and that it's an important, or maybe one of the most important things. All right, I want to talk a bit about sustainment as a science and a culture. All right, so and there's a strategic statement there for you too. Never mistake a clear view for a short distance, right? So you could put that in your ship metaphor as well. Okay, so let's see if we can get these things to move. So I think everybody here on this call probably knows pretty much what sustainment is, or you have a pretty good idea. And you know why it's important. But let's click it again here. You know, what should it look like in the future? And, you know, how do we get beyond today? Okay, hit it again. How does it, and really the question is, how does it transcend the boundaries of a predominantly transactional activity? Okay, in other words, today's sustainment is largely tactical, not strategic, right? And really to get beyond sort of a tactical, reactive sort of world, you have to, my argument would be at least that you have to start to make it a science, okay? And so click it again. So the other piece of this is, how do we change the public's perception of sustainment? Probably you're not ever going to really, on a big scale, have the opportunity to get beyond a transactional activity to a strategic one, unless you get buy-in from folks who are not sustainment folks. Okay, so maybe no, you don't need buy-in from middle schoolers, okay, but you do need buy-in from a public and maybe politicians and a Congress who are not actually performing sustainment, and they've got to think of this as a science, and they've got to think of this as a culture. So click it one more time. So, you know, in my view, the difficulty here is you got to somehow get out of this transactional sustainment box, right? And the transactional sustainment box is all these boundaries, right, that are painted around us. Okay, whether it's managing DMSMS or some other facet of sustainment or all of sustainment, you're stuck with these things, right? You got contracts and you got suppliers and contractors that have a traditional way of doing business. And they're not really interested necessarily in changing that way of doing business, right? They have a business model, they want to go with it, right? You have policy, standards, and regulations that have been developed, okay, in some cases to suit the contractors and the suppliers, okay, and the big OEMs too, right? And those things need some change, right? You have a hardware and software centricity to this whole thing. Okay, a lot of people, I would argue, don't think of sustainment in a big enough context, right? Hardware and software is certainly part of it, no question about that. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's part of it. You know, it's also about the workforce. It's also about the standards. It's also about the contracts. It's about the supply chain, right? It's about all these things. And if any of those things go south, okay, they take you with it, right? So sustainment has to look at all that stuff, and it's got to look at all that stuff concurrently. And then finally, it has to look at this thing called culture too, right? So culture meaning that there has to be a wider perception and semi-accurate or somewhat accurate understanding of what it is and why it's important, or folks aren't going to let you do it, and letting you do it means they aren't going to fund you. Okay, they're going to put the appropriate funding in place in the appropriate way so you can actually do strategic things rather than tactical things. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, so a general definition of sustainment. So if Ethan can have a definition, I get to have one too. All right, so some years ago, actually at the University of Maryland, my dean, who's now the president of the university, okay, asked us to define sustainment. And it turns out that Daryl Pines, who used to be the Dean of Engineering at Maryland and now is the president, he is an aeronautical engineer. He was chair of the aerospace department at one point in time, and he was at DARPA as well. So he gets it, all right? So, okay, so score one, right? I now have a president of my university who does know what sustainment means, and he does get it, all right? So, but we were tasked to come up with a definition of sustainment that could work not just for our side of the house, sustaining systems, but also could work for even the folks on the environmental side for which it's sustainability, all right? So, and this is what we came up with, okay? So you see it there: development, production, procurement, operation, and management and disposal of systems that maximizes the availability of goods and services while minimizing their footprint. Okay, so now click it again. We need a few other definitions here, right? So this is where it gets useful, right? So in this case, footprint represents whatever kind of impact is relevant to the system's stakeholders. Okay, and that could be a cost, that could be economics for sure. It could be human health, energy, environmental, resource consumption, pick, right? It's whatever footprint is important to you. Availability is the same way you would define it, right? It's the fraction of time that the good or service is in the right state, supported by the right resources in the right place that you need it, or whomever gets value from it needs it. And customer is whatever entity, okay, cares, right? So this could be an individual person, it could be a company, a government, a country, a geographic region, maybe the whole planet, right? So this was the sort of general definition of sustainment that we came up with. I think the simple definition was capacity to endure, okay, as I recall, but this is the more complex one. So let's go to the next one. All right, so sustainment reform, right? We've had acquisition reform, that's old news, okay? That's been around for a long time, right? You know, has been sort of well supported by, you know, the information revolution, data analytics, all that stuff, right? We need sustainment reform. And I don't want to argue that that hasn't happened, okay? Or that it isn't happening, or there aren't things out there that constitute sustainment reform, okay? There certainly are, right? There have been lots of initiatives, and they're good things, okay? But they haven't really succeeded in changing the culture or really making much of a dent in the culture, okay, so far. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, yeah, so how do we get there? All right, so next slide. Okay, so I would argue that part of it is socialism, not all of it, but part of it is socialization, okay? Where do you want to get to? Okay, click it again. Okay, so this is where I want to get to, right? You know, when I was a kid, you drank a can of soda, right? And you threw it in the trash and you didn't think twice about it, okay? Today, if I drink a can of soda, or if my kids drink a can of soda, cripes, we'll carry the empty can with us for a half an hour till we encounter a recycling bin, okay? If that's not culture change, I don't know what is, right? So if you click it again, the question is, how do you get to here? How do you get to this place with sustainment, right? So that a customer who's potentially simply a taxpayer, my next door neighbor who pays taxes, how do we get them to think, okay, when a bond issue is passed, to add 20 miles of additional train? Well, where I live in Maryland, there's something called the Purple Line. It's part of the Washington Metro, right? So, and it's shut down at the moment. The construction of it is shut down at the moment. But what I would like to see is that when people talk about the Purple Line, when my next door neighbor talks about the Purple Line, I would like them to almost the first thing they think and the first thing they ask is, once we build it, how do we keep it going? All right. So who's going to sustain it? How is it going to be resourced to be sustained? How am I going to make sure that 10 years from now, the taxpayers or the taxing district or whatever it is still wants to sustain it, right? So how do we get those questions to the front? All right. So, and I'm not saying that middle schoolers have to ask these questions, but heck, you know, at least people coming out of college, this should be, you know, in their brains at the front. Okay. When we have these big infrastructure projects, when we have all kinds of systems that have to go on for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they got to be thinking at the beginning, not how much it's going to cost to procure them, but how we're going to keep them going. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so, you know, who has to be at the table here? You know, obviously it's engineering, right? Engineering are the folks who understand how systems work, right? How they age, how they fail, all those illities that make up sustainment, okay, are engineering things, okay? Public policy has to be there too, right? So if policy does not keep up with the engineering, then engineering was simply a academic exercise, right? So how do you get policy to keep up? And part of the way to keep policy to keep up is to educate and change the culture, right? And you got to have business, right? So we have to be able to understand how to make business cases. Okay, engineers are not good at making business cases. Okay, so business cases are something that has to be made every day, and that means you have to be able to do things like quantify life cycle cost, quantify cost avoidance, and things like that, not just wave your hands around. Okay, so if you click it one more time, I think there's one more comment in the corner. You know, all this takes, you know, some appropriate balancing of risk aversion, innovation, and system evolution. Okay, generally speaking, today we sort of lean, you know, towards maybe 100% risk aversion without being willing to, you know, balance it with the other stuff. All right, so let's go on again. Thank you, and click it again. So what's the science of sustainment? Well, it's these things, and it's more stuff too, right? But it has to be a willingness amongst, at least in academia, okay, and maybe other organizations, even folks like DARPA and stuff like that, ONR and DARPA and places like that, they have to see that these are not just engineering problems, right? At minimum, they're system engineering problems, and they're really problems that have to have an equal mix of governance, okay, engineering, business, logistics. Everybody has to come together, all right, to make a science. right? So let's go to the next one. Yeah, on the students. Okay, so I'm a professor, so I'm with the students, right? And what do I see? And I see this in engineering, right? Is that universities and my department, right? They're good at preparing students to design shiny new stuff, okay? But the students are never, almost never introduced to the problems of keeping that stuff going. You shine, you design and you put out there this beautiful, shiny, really cool new piece of technology, and you go on to the next cool piece of technology, right? So nobody thinks about how to keep it going. And it's partly our fault. We don't educate the students on that. That's not the way most engineering schools don't have classes on how to keep old stuff running. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Because again, so I think this is much more of a challenge than a lot of universities understand. There's a huge amount of potential at the universities, okay, to attack this problem if you can get them interested in it. All right. Now, part of getting them interested in it is the practical one, is dollars. You know, if there isn't dollars to support research at the universities, then the universities aren't going to be interested in doing that research, right? So there has to be some sort of funding mechanism, although the funding of the universities to work on these problems is much, much smaller than anywhere near the magnitude of the cost of these problems. So, you know, there ought to be some way to get that done. But, you know, there's untapped value, and a lot of people at universities have interesting things to bring to the table, but they don't understand this problem, and they've never been introduced to it, and they have no resources to work on it. Okay, so let's click the next one. All right, so I think there's lots of aspects here, right? We got to train the students. Okay, and that's not just training the engineers, it's training the policy students and the business students to actually contribute to the sustainment workforce. Okay, not just sort of convert them because they're reasonable athletes after we hire them, right? Okay, and I think we need to socialize everybody. Okay, and that's not just the folks we're going to put in the sustainment workforce, right? We need to socialize all of the other students, you know, even the dance majors, right, and the theater majors and the athletes. They all have to be, you know, they will carry a can around till they find a recycling bin. All right, so you know, we have to get them involved, right? So let's go to the next one. So click it one more time there. Why now, right? Okay. I would argue that, yeah, why not now? Okay, but I would also argue that, you know, the world is starting to migrate towards really more of a mission engineering model, right? Models that favor buying outcomes, buying mission success, some version of that, rather than buying systems. Are we there today? We're not. Will we be there really soon? No. Okay. But we do see more of this going on, right? Heck, my kids don't have a lot of interest, don't have nearly as much interest in owning an automobile as I did, okay, when I was their age, right? So partly that is because they simply want to buy an outcome, which is call an Uber and get me from point A to point B, right? So, and we start to see this sort of thinking pervading other stuff, right? So, you know, this mission success thinking may not be where all of the contractors necessarily want to go, because their business model is built upon, well, you know, I could like give away the system and collect maintenance and upgrade and all that stuff on it forever, right? So, so this is a different way that people think, right? So if you click it again, so, you know, I would argue that, right, this kind of changes everything. So sustainment in this kind of a world, a mission engineering outcome-based world, means sustainment is not an afterthought anymore. It is a strategic differentiator. Okay, and if you can't do it, get it right, and do it strategically, you're out of business, right? So if you click it again, you know, I would argue that, you know, that moment when you close the cupboard, it says here, the cabinet, and you hear something fall and you walk away because that's the next guy's problem, right? Okay, well, click it again. Not anymore, okay? It's now everybody's problem, Okay, so let's go to the last slide here. I get my advertisement at the end, right? So the organization at the University of Maryland that I run along with the School of Public Policy is called MHSS, the Maryland Center of Excellence for Sustainment Sciences. All right, so, and it involves itself in all this stuff that's sustainment. And if you click it one more time, this is the end. So we're trying to get from there, the whack-a-mole game of transactional sustainment, click it one more time, to there, okay? And to actually educate students and do work that can get us towards strategic sustainment. All right, I think that's it for me.
So not quite yet. Thank you so much. That's good
Right.
stuff. While we bring up the next video, I did have a question though for
Sure.
you, Peter, which was, you know, you said something earlier like socialize everyone, and I wanted to understand what are your thoughts around like the impact of kind of grassroots socialization versus, you know, the kind of senior leadership socialization.
Yeah, I mean, it really has to be more grassroots. And, you know, it has to be almost experiential, okay, in some sense, is that you got to start, you know, a place to start would be, you know, like engineers in whatever engineering discipline they're in, mechanical or civil or whatever, they all end up doing sort of capstone design sort of courses when they're seniors, right? They're supposed to bring everything together, right? And you know, I watch these guys and they bring they do CAD design and they do some prototyping and they do all these things, and they never talk about sustainment. You know, they never bring that piece together. Okay. And so I think that, you know, there's a place, maybe that's not as far back as you want to go. Okay. But, you know, there's a spot where, you know, if you all of a sudden got your foot in the door there and said, in a year-long capstone design class, we're going to spend a month and we're going to talk about how, you know, what's your plan for keeping this product supported? Okay, and that may be as simple as talking about warranty, right? We don't think about warranty necessarily. We don't think about warranty as being a sustainment thing, but it is a sustainment thing, right? It's a promise by whomever sold you the device that they will make good on keeping it going for some period of time. And they're going to have to figure out how much money it's going to cost to do that and what kind of resources they have to put in place to make that happen. You know, so even if we just got sort of the capstone level folks to even talk about seriously about, you know, you can't sell this thing for $5 and provide an 18-month warranty. How are you going to collect the money for that warranty? Oh, and how much is that warranty going to cost? Oh, and well, you can't figure out how much that warranty is going to cost unless you understand its reliability, right? And then you have to understand how people are going to, you know, treat the device and whether they're going to return the device. And, you know, you have to start talking about what happens, you know, at least 18, 24 months from now. Maybe that doesn't get us all the way out to how an airplane is sustained, but it starts them thinking about, well, hold on, the cost of my device has to be twice as much as I thought it was going to have to be because I got to keep it going for 24 months, you know.
It's a
So,
good mentality. That's a good mentality.
yeah, you know, there are ways to start getting them to think about these things.
It's good. I remind you to go ahead and submit your questions to info@gdca.com.